The first time the Duke heard her name, it came from an old woman beside a fire burning down to nothing. "Find a woman worthy of you," his mother said, her frail hands folded beneath a quilt thinned by decades of hard winters. Not one chasing titles, not one trained to curtsy in gilded rooms. Find the one who still knows how to hold steady when the world turns mean. Those words stayed with him long after the funeral bells went silent. For close to 2 years, he crossed through towns, endured dinners, sat through introductions arranged by wealthy families more interested in acreage and bloodlines than truth. Every mother thrust her daughter forward. Every father spoke of property and pedigree. Yet each time he rode away, the quiet inside him only deepened. By the time autumn settled into the northern valleys, people had started whispering about the Duke who could not choose a wife. Some called him proud, others called him broken. None of them knew about the promise made at his mother's bedside. Far from the crowded estates and polished city avenues stood a small farming town, pressed tight between dense woods and open pasture. Wagons seldom stopped there unless they carried business with the lumber camps or cattle traders. Winters struck hard, and people learned young how to survive on little. That was where he first heard of her. It happened inside a dusty general store while rain beat against the roof overhead. The Duke had stopped only to rest his horse and warm his hands. Near the counter, 2 older women spoke softly while sorting dried beans into cloth sacks. "Quote 2, one said. "Quote 3, the other answered. Most folks would have gone bitter. The Duke paid no mind at first, until the next sentence reached him. "Best woman in 3 counties, if you ask me. Shame life never gave her much in return." Something in their voices made him glance up. He asked nothing then. But later that evening, the innkeeper mentioned her too. A young woman living alone near the edge of the woods. Her father dead, her brothers gone west chasing silver. A woman known more for her kindness than her beauty, though some said she carried both in equal measure. The innkeeper cautioned, wiping a glass cup with a stained rag. __quote _5__. The Duke listened without speaking. Outside, cold winds swept the empty road bare. Most men of his station would have laughed at the notion of riding miles on small-town gossip. Yet his mother's words rose again, unbidden, sharp. "Find a woman worthy of you." Before sunrise the next morning, he saddled his horse and turned north. The road grew rougher with every mile. Trees pressed close along the narrow trail. Patches of old snow clung to the shadows beneath them. By afternoon, clouds rolled low across the hills, turning everything grey and still. When he finally reached the property the innkeeper described, he nearly believed he had come to the wrong place. The farmhouse was small, weathered by seasons. One section of fence leaned badly inward. Smoke drifted thin from the chimney. Near the barn stood a woman splitting firewood alone. Sleeves rolled past her wrists despite the cold. She did not look toward the road, did not hurry to greet him, did not smile at expensive clothes or a polished saddle. She simply kept working. The Duke sat motionless atop his horse, watching her longer than he intended. Something different lived in the way she moved, something steady. Then shouting broke through the trees behind him. A rider came tearing down the trail. "Miss," the man called out breathlessly toward the farmhouse. "You need to leave now. They've come back for the land." The woman went still. For the first time, fear moved across her face, and the Duke understood he had ridden into something far more dangerous than a simple visit. The rider's horse stumbled to a halt near the fence, chest heaving from the long run through timber. Mud caked the animal's legs, and the man in the saddle looked pale beneath the sharp wind. "They're already near the lower creek," he warned again. "I counted 3 wagons, men carrying papers from the county office." The woman set the axe down slowly. Her grip stayed tight around the handle. Her eyes drifted toward the distant hills beyond the tree line, as though she already knew exactly who was coming. "They promised to return before winter," she said, her voice barely above the rain. The Duke swung down from the saddle without breaking his gaze from her. This close, he could read the exhaustion hiding beneath that composed face. She couldn't have been past 25, but weariness had settled into her features, the kind earned by years of carrying weight no one offered to share. 11, he asked. She looked at him for the first time since he'd ridden up. Her eyes moved across his coat, his gloves, the polished silver mounted on his saddle. In small towns, wealth drew either envy or suspicion. She offered neither. "I know the kind," she answered. The rider pulled his hat from his head, fingers restless. "Miss, they're saying your father owed money before he passed." "He did owe money," she said, "but not the sum they're claiming." The Duke listened without speaking. Something already sat wrong in his gut. Rich men weaponized confusion, lost papers, relentless pressure, to strip land from families too worn down to resist. He'd watched it happen across farming counties. Widows and daughters left with nothing and no one standing beside them. The woman wiped her palms against her skirt and moved toward the porch. Quote 16 __. Thunder growled along the horizon as they stepped through the door. The farmhouse was plain but scrubbed clean. A kettle sat warming near the stove. Folded blankets lay across a wooden chair, edges squared. No luxury anywhere, but every surface carried the evidence of labor and care. The Duke's eyes found a bundle of letters tied with string beside the window, most still sealed. "You live here alone?" he asked. "My aunt stayed through last winter," she said, pouring hot water into 3 cups. "She died in the spring." No grief in her voice when she spoke the words, only the flat ground of acceptance. The rider gave his name as Eli, a worker from the neighboring mill. He'd known her family since he was a boy. Rain hammered the roof now, and he spoke more freely about the men circling the property. Eli said. The Duke shifted back in his chair. Eli said. Clara set a cup near the Duke, but stayed on her feet. She said. Silence settled over the room, only rain against glass and the soft pop of firewood. The Duke studied her more carefully now. She spoke without embellishment, without reaching for pity. Even staring down the loss of everything she had, she held herself with that same quiet iron he'd noticed outside by the woodpile. "What's your name?" he asked. She paused before answering, as though names had stopped meaning much to her. Clara. The simplicity of it struck him after the long road that had carried him here. Clara turned sharply toward the window. Through rain-streaked glass, dark shapes of wagons appeared on the distant road. "They're early," Eli breathed. The Duke rose slowly. 3 wagons ground closer through the storm. Mounted riders flanked them, dressed in dark coats. Even at that distance, something cold and deliberate hung around the group. Clara's jaw tightened. Fear still lived beneath her expression, but she pressed it down. Quote 30 she told the Duke. He had come here by chance, but his mother's face surfaced again. Not the words this time, the way her eyes looked when she spoke them. Find a woman worthy of you. Outside, wagon wheels churned through wet earth and stopped near the front gate. One man stepped down, clutching a leather case under his arm. Another carried a rifle slung across his shoulder, barrel angled toward the mud. The Duke moved to the window. Then his face changed. Standing beside those wagons was a man he recognized from the capital. A man bound to powerful families, tied to stolen land disputes and quiet scandals smothered under money. And now that man stood at Clara's gate. The moment Clara saw them, gathered outside her fence, she squared her shoulders, the posture of a woman bracing for a storm she had weathered too many times to count. Eli muttered something low and backed from the window. Clara said, her voice low. The Duke kept his gaze locked on the man beside the wagons. He knew that figure from the capital. Tall, angular face, always wrapped in dark coats regardless of season. Vernon Halley. People with money called him Mr. Halley, out of caution, not respect. Halley never showed where trouble brewed. He dispatched others. If he'd ridden all the way to this valley himself, the ground beneath Clara's farmhouse was worth far more than anyone suspected. A heavy fist struck the front door. Clara moved toward it before either man could intervene. She pulled it open, and cold rain drove sideways into the room. Halley peeled off his gloves with deliberate slowness, wearing an expression calm enough to make skin crawl. 34, he said, pleasant as a Sunday sermon. 35. 36, she answered. 37. Haller offered a thin smile. 2 county officers stood behind him, alongside a stranger clutching a leather folder swollen with documents. Neither officer would meet Clara's eyes, which told the Duke everything he needed. Small towns folded under wealthy men's boots. Then Haller's gaze drifted toward the fireplace, toward the Duke. His composure tightened. Just barely. Well, Haller said, measuring each word, I did not expect nobility hiding in these woods tonight. The Duke stepped closer. And I did not expect you threatening a woman over dirt and grass. Business, Haller replied, smooth as oiled leather. Nothing personal. Clara's jaw set hard. One officer cleared his throat and unfolded a document. He explained that outstanding debts tied to Clara's father granted the Eastern Railroad legal claim over portions of the property. If payment failed to arrive before first snowfall, the land would transfer. The Duke listened without speaking, but something in those figures rang hollow. The debt had nearly doubled inside a few months. That amount is fabricated, Clara said at once. The man with the papers still wouldn't look at her. Eli surged forward. Clara said sharply. The room went still as stone. Haller's face changed, only a heartbeat's worth. But the Duke caught it, a flash of worry beneath that polished mask. Haller said. Clara hesitated. That single pause told the Duke everything. The papers were either gone or buried somewhere beyond her reach. Silence stretched long enough to ache. Haller adjusted his coat and stepped back toward the rain. He announced. His gaze settled on the Duke like a blade finding its mark. Quiet meaning lived beneath those words. Rumors, leverage, threat. The Duke had spent years sidestepping political games and marriage schemes among wealthy families. Yet standing inside Clara's farmhouse, rain hammering the roof, he felt closer to real danger than he ever had among aristocrats. After the riders finally disappeared into darkness, silence reclaimed the house. Water tapped against glass while Clara stood near the doorway, eyes fixed on nothing. You know him, she said without turning. Yes, and he knows you. The Duke let the silence hold a moment longer. My family has crossed paths with men like Halley for generations, he admitted. They build empires by stripping land from people too small to fight. Eli dropped into a chair at the table. Then why would someone that powerful want this farm? No one answered. But later that evening, helping Clara brace the barn doors against the worsening storm, the Duke spotted something near the northern boundary. Fresh wooden stakes driven deep into the earth beyond the creek. Railroad markings. His eyes narrowed. The planned tracks for this valley ran nowhere close to this stretch, not according to any public map. Yet someone had already surveyed Clara's land in secret, which meant Haller was concealing something far larger than unpaid debts. Thunder groaned above them as Clara followed his stare toward those distant stakes. She said, barely above a whisper. The Duke turned to her. Clara dropped her voice lower still, careful as though the trees themselves were listening. Wind tore across the open ground most of that night. By morning the storm had broken, but the air pressing against the farmhouse walls carried a new weight. Clara stood beside the kitchen table, bent over one of her father's old maps. The Duke watched frost bleeding slow off the window glass. "You truly think something's buried out there?" he asked. Clara folded the map with deliberate hands. "My father did," she paused. "And you?" A breath. "When I was young, I believed it was just a farmer's tale, something to keep hope burning through lean winters. But then men like Haller began buying every parcel surrounding ours. Families pushed out quiet. Some vanished in the night after refusing his offers." Eli came through the door, carrying split wood against his chest. His jaw was tight. "Word's already spreading in town," he said. "People saw Halle's wagons yesterday. Most figure the county's coming to take this farm." Clara's eyes dropped, though no words followed. The Duke marked how she wore fear in silence, never speaking it. Even now, with everything closing around her, she spent more worry on burdening others than on herself. That afternoon, the Duke rode alongside Eli toward the lower creek. They wanted a closer look at the railroad markers. Frost glazed the earth beneath bare branches, and the woods held their breath. Nothing but distant crows wheeling against grey sky. Near the creek bank, they found more than wooden stakes. Fresh gouges stretched along the hillside. Someone had already been digging through this valley under cover of darkness. Eli crouched near the torn soil. The Duke's jaw tightened. Shovel scars. Lantern oil soaked into dirt. Boot prints pressed deep. Haller's people were hunting something. Farther along the ridge, smoke threaded upward through trees to the north. Tucked between dense pines, a small camp. 2 wagons, armed men watching the valley floor below. Eli swore under his breath. Before they could edge nearer, voices carried from the camp. A man said. Another voice pressed. The answer landed flat and cold. The Duke met Eli's eyes. So the receipts were real. That evening, they rode hard back to the farmhouse. Clara heard them through without a single interruption. "My father hid important things with great care," she said once the silence had stretched long enough. "After my mother passed, he trusted almost no one." She moved toward the staircase slowly, chasing something half-remembered. "When I was small, he told me once, if trouble ever found us, the truth would still be inside this house." The Duke followed her up, lantern in hand. The second floor held 2 cramped bedrooms and an attic crowded with old trunks, rusted tools, quilts folded thick with dust on warped shelves. They searched for hours while night settled heavy outside. Clara opened drawers stuffed with yellowed letters. The Duke pried at loose floorboards near the attic wall. Nothing. Eventually, Clara sank back against a wooden chest. Frustration cracked through that careful composure for the first time. "They're gone," she whispered. "Maybe Halla already took them." The Duke knelt beside a narrow table near the window. One leg sat uneven against the floor. He shifted it, and something small dropped beneath. A brass key, dark with rust. Clara's eyes locked on it instantly. She seized the lantern, moved fast toward the attic corner, where an old wardrobe stood draped in blankets. Behind it, a narrow door, locked, nearly invisible against the wallboards. Her fingers shook as she pressed the key into place. The lock gave with a click. Inside that cramped space sat a wooden box wrapped in cloth. For the first time since the Duke had arrived at this farmhouse, hope showed openly on Clara's face. But before her hands could lift the box, a sharp crack split the silence below. Then another. The front door. Someone forcing it open. Eli's voice cut up from below like a whip crack. The Duke was already moving toward the attic stairs. Clara pressed the wooden box against her ribs with both hands. Boots hammered across the porch beneath them, heavy, deliberate. A second impact shook the whole frame of the house. The lantern flame shuddered against the walls. Then a voice rose from downstairs, one they all knew. It rang out. Clara's gaze found the Duke. Fear and resolve warred behind her eyes in equal measure. Below them, wood shrieked and splintered as the front door started buckling inward. The crack of timber tore through the farmhouse while Eli wrestled a heavy table against the entrance. "Move!" he bellowed toward the attic. "They're through!" The Duke reached Clara the instant she locked both arms around that box. Colour had drained from her face entirely. Her spine stayed rigid. "Another way out?" he asked. She jerked her chin. "Back loft stairs, below us." Voices erupted as the front door gave way completely. The Duke seized the lantern. Clara guided him through a cramped attic corridor concealed behind stacked grain sacks. Each step on the stairway groaned beneath their weight as they descended toward the barn behind the house. Night air hit them like cold water. Rain from the earlier storm had turned the yard into ankle-deep mud, thick and sucking. Inside the house, Hallie's men ripped through drawers, overturned furniture, hunted for what wasn't there. Eli slipped out moments after, an old rifle cradled against his chest. His breath came ragged. "They're tearing through every room," he said low. But Hallie stayed inside. Believes the papers haven't left the house. The Duke looked at Clara. "Then we use that." She needed no explanation. They crossed into the barn together. Clara set the wooden box on a scarred work table. Her fingers shook, just barely, as she pried up the lid. Folded receipts filled the interior. Property records, signed county documents bound with ribbon. And beneath all of it, a leather journal, worn soft as cloth from years of handling. Clara opened it with care. My father's notes. The Duke stepped close as she turned page after page. Most held records of payments, land agreements, names woven through the valley like roots. Near the back, though, the writing changed entirely. Railroad surveys, hidden mineral assessments, purchase agreements drafted in secret. The Duke's jaw tightened as he read. Hallie and a circle of wealthy investors had found silver deposits running beneath the valley. Years ago. Rather than deal with landowners honestly, they'd devised a scheme. False debts, legal coercion, farms seized for pennies. That's what the land was worth to them, Eli said through his teeth. Clara's throat worked hard before she could speak. The Duke finished the thought for her. Nobody got another word out. Footsteps, outside the barn. Then Halla's voice, smooth as oiled leather, drifting through the dark. You've made this considerably harder than it needed to be. The barn doors swung wide, slow and deliberate. Hallie walked in, flanked by two men. His expression held that familiar calm, but something beneath it had burned away. "Hand me the box," he said, quiet as a man discussing weather. The Duke placed himself between Halle and Clara. "You fabricated debts, stripped land from families across this valley." His voice carried no bluster, only stone. "These papers reached the governor by morning." Real anger broke through Halle's composure for the first time, naked and sharp. Clara answered from behind the Duke, steady, unbowed. The barn went silent. Then, hooves. Not one horse, many. Halle spun toward the doors as townspeople rode into the yard, lanterns cutting through the darkness in a ragged constellation. Eli grinned. "First time all night," he said. Farmers rode in, mill workers, ranch families with weathered faces and hard hands. Some had felt Halle's threats firsthand. Others were kin to families pushed off their land years before, land with silver running beneath it they never knew about. And standing among the crowd, the county officers. The same men who'd refused to meet Clara's eyes just yesterday. Tonight they stared straight at Halle. One officer walked forward, unhurried. "We've heard plenty tonight." Halle's gaze swept the crowded yard. For the first time, he understood the ground beneath him had given way. By dawn, he and his men sat in irons. The false records pulled from their wagons lay spread across the sheriff's desk like a confession written in ink and greed. Word of the Valley scandal moved fast, across the state, into the capital itself, all within days. Farms, seized under fraudulent claims, returned to their rightful owners. The Eastern Railroad project ground to a halt. And Clara's father, his name, at last, stood clean. Weeks passed. Winter laid its white silence over the valley. Smoke curled from the farmhouse chimney, thin and steady against a pale sky. Townspeople worked nearby, mending fences the storms had torn down. The Duke stood beside Clara on the porch. Children's laughter carried sharp across the frozen yard. "You could return to the capital now," she said. Quiet, no pressure in it. "I could," he said. Neither turned away. For the first time in years, something inside him had gone still. Not empty, still. The restlessness that had driven him mile after mile, town after town. Gone. The journey his mother once set him upon had not ended in gilded ballrooms or among landed families of influence. It ended here, beside a quiet farmhouse tucked against the tree line. He understood now what she meant. A worthy woman was not measured by name or station. She was measured by courage, by kindness. By the iron it took to stand upright when the world pressed down hard. Spring brought another gathering to the valley. Not for land disputes, not for railroad claims. A wedding held beneath open sky, the whole town present. Clara smiled beside him while church bells rang out across the hills, their sound rolling slow over the ridgeline. The miles he had ridden to find her had delivered him not only to love, but to the kind of life no amount of wealth could purchase. Subscribe to the channel for more stories. Your support keeps them alive. Leave a comment. Tell me what you felt and what kind of story you want next. See you in the next one.